All right, guys, welcome back. Another exhilarating episode of Energy Bites this week. Got myself, John Calfan, my wonderful co-host, Bobby Nealon, other rad dad. We got a new rad dad joining the club, Jeff Bernard, the manager of digital at Aerion, which he just informed us is basically the all things tech position. So that's why he's here today. But welcome to the podcast, man.
Thanks y'all for having me.
Yeah.
Happy to be part of the Rad Dad Club.
Yeah. Welcome.
It's a good club, man.
We're just discussing the joys of parenthood and sleeping. And,
yeah. Sleep schedules. All about it.
Very important.
Absolutely. Especially when they're little. A little bit harder when they get older, but rocking my slobber and hog billboard today in delirious hopes of us maybe pulling a random win out against LSU this weekend. But
best of luck.
I'm not holding my breath. I'm elated that we started out and I know where we're at with the season, so I don't get any expectations. But speaking of Louisiana, you guys have is that your main office in
so
Broussard?
corporate is in Broussard, Louisiana, and then we have South Texas. We're pretty much over the South, all over the South. Main shell plays, Permian Basin, Haynesville. We were involved in the Northeast at one time, but it's too cyclical.
Yeah.
And
that's a long way to try and manage from.
It is,
Gulf
and we
Coast.
did it for a while. That's actually where I started, but we're focused in the South for now.
Cool.
Nice.
Well, we'll get into Aerion, but kind of give us, we normally ask everybody kind of what's your background? Kind of where'd you grow up? How'd you get into energy and or tech and end up, kind of at Aerion at this point?
Yeah, so I started in as a liberal arts major in college, and graduated and needed something to do, and so I decided to go to work for Aerion and moved up to Ohio. Ohio first, and worked the Utica shell play. And so Chesapeake had moved a bunch of rigs in from the Upper Marcellus, and it was trial by fire. Like, go up there, figure it out, get some reins on this thing. I think it was like 4 rigs at the time. And so I managed that, and then
what year are we talking here?
That was 2012.
Okay.
So I was 22.
So it's like Utica exploration back then.
Yes. When Albury was at the helm, it was like full bore, right? And so
those were some fun times, man.
Yeah,
they really were
real fun. And so then I moved to Pittsburgh from there and kind of managed things out of there as well. Started doing some rig-to-rig sales as well as operations. Hired a good ops manager. I'm not inherently an ops manager. And so that kind of led into city sales, and Chesapeake was sort of my, first big account. And again, I want to remind you, this is the Albury days, right?
Yeah.
So Chesapeake campus, Albury days, really cool place to be and start out. And so sold to them for a while, then wound up in Houston managing a Hess account, and then sort of from there, continued to do the corporate sales thing, and meanwhile the whole time I'm coding nights and weekends, right? Started with WordPress sites and stuff like that. Completely wrecked WordPress site, like build it,
and you didn't start any of this until like you were working. You decided to learn this stuff while you were working.
So I guess backing up a little bit, I learned like Dreamweaver in college, and like Photoshop and Illustrator. Dude, right? Because liberal arts major, you're putting together like.
Right. So what was the degree? Was it?
It was in advertising.
Okay. So
and
you had exposure to
software,
to a lot of those creative softwares, so to speak. But dude, I remember, I think it was in middle school or high school, taking, like media publishing or whatever the stupid name for media graphics was back in the early 2000s. And I remember Dreamweaver was one of the things that we were learning, and I remember seeing the giant book, the instruction manual of Dreamweaver. I was like, man, that's intimidating. And then you start playing around, like, holy shit, I can build websites.
Yeah,
that was such a cool thing back then.
The coolest.
Yeah.
And so it really didn't. I mean, I was good at Illustrator. Illustrator was my go-to, right? And so, but all that kind of taught me how to interact with software.
Yeah.
Right. Because things back then still weren't where they are today, right? It was still like a lot of you had to like paste in codes here and there. And so you kind of got a feel for it. So, fast forward to Houston again. And we were having some trouble, trying to get some projects off the ground internally. There was IT support issues. And so I was like, I'm going to take it over. Just take the bull by the horns. And so I found myself taking over just low-level IT stuff and then kind of worked up from there. And then I'm like, well, IoT started coming around, right? And I'm like, Particle and all of these companies, I think Hologram, which is like a SIM company, started making bandwidth a little bit cheaper, a little easier to do stuff. So started messing around with some of that stuff. And then I was like, well, why can't we connect some centrifuges? Like, right, the biggest discrepancy typically whenever you're like processing solids control, because that's what Aerion does on a rig, is that you do an end of well recap. And so it's like, what happened? And it's word of mouth. It's
right.
Somebody
notes
was
at a spreadsheet or
right. Somebody's recording
on a tablet,
right? If that
a paper tablet, not an electronic tablet.
And so you have this data being entered from the field, and it's like, well, how do we get it to a point where we can see this data in real time?
Yeah.
And so you keep moving forward, iteration after iteration. You have to start battling with PLCs, right? So you start learning this whole stack of equipment from hardware to software.
Yeah.
And then you start finding like-minded operators. And then things start evolving through this whole time. Like it wasn't like a straight shot, right?
Yeah, it never is.
It never is. And then you find the right operator and you start getting the right equipment. And then you're starting to integrate with their IT systems, right? And their real-time streaming.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of been what I've been focused on. And then we're working on some other new products, connected products as well.
Okay.
But what's interesting is that as a service company, a smaller service company, doing it from the ground up is very hard. And so I don't suggest doing that.
Yeah.
I suggest finding like the right vendors and the right equipment to like achieve that,
Yeah, no, that's it's funny because a lot of people, on the software side, people have the same exact battle. Do I build it from scratch, or do I use, somebody's SDK, or do I just use full third-party SaaS product, right? Regardless of whether it's, machine-to-machine messaging or authentication or whatever it may be. And it's a real, like, that's honestly one of the big things we wanted to kind of try and highlight with this podcast is that, like, there's a million different ways to end up at the same result. And
right.
What a lot of people, my learnings from this have been, whatever works best for you is typically the best path. Whether that's, if you're trying to get something like you've only got 3 knobs to turn on the project management, wheel, and it's cost, speed, and quality.
Right.
And so depending on which one of those is most important, one of them can potentially
I've never heard it put
down,
that way,
right?
but that absolutely makes sense to me. Yeah.
And so that's like, hey, if we need something fast, you're probably going to go with a SaaS offering versus if it's not as critical and we can take our time, then maybe we'll do an SDK or just hard code it from nothing. And so it's a very real problem. Before we get too deep, back up, describe what you guys do at Aerion for the average person that might not be as familiar with the drilling side.
So we're on the drilling side. We process drilling mud through a process called solids control. You're basically taking what's coming out of the wellbore, putting it through equipment that's spinning at a high rate of speed. You're separating the fluid from the solids and then allowing them to basically recycle the fluid back into the drilling system while keeping the mud in specification that they've set for the well.
Right. And then you also do analysis on the solids as well, right?
Right.
To understand where you're at.
Should we even set back? I don't know how many people and just talk about drilling mud.
Yeah, that's a good point too, right? So, when you're drilling, you've got a giant pipe that has a bit on the end of it, and you're pushing fluid or drilling mud through the center of that pipe, and it comes out the bottom of it and then comes back up to surface between the space between the pipe and the actual earth called the annulus. And that's what these guys are looking at and separating. And so instead of that just going into a tank and it being waste, they separate the physical solids out of it and then they allow the operators to recycle it. Is that a
Yeah, that's a good description. And one thing that they used to do is they used to just dump it like into big fields,
Okay.
and do a process called land farming. But over the course of probably the past 7 to 10 years, that has been phased out, obviously because of environmental concerns. And so our part of the industry has grown pretty significantly, and so we basically handle everything that's coming out of the wellbore. And we process all the fluid, right? Take the solids out, and then we run tests on the fluid called a retort, which allows you to see the properties of the fluid to make sure that you're processing everything effectively.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I think even just get back to criticality. I mean, because even like the mud weight and everything matters. Like it can help
It's
prevent
super,
blowouts,
super
right?
important.
It's one of the most important things on the rig.
Yeah. So when they talk about mud weight, again, for those of you who aren't familiar, they're talking about the fluid properties that they're pushing into the wellbore, and those matter because as you're drilling through the earth, you come across different formations that have different pressures, and you want to make sure that the pressure coming out of the bottom of the drill bit is not higher than the pressure going into it, which would cause a blowout. And so drilling mud and all of its chemical and fluid properties are incredibly important through the drilling process. So
So I think this starts to then highlight, probably like the importance of some of the real-time aspects of what you guys work towards and have implemented or work.
Exactly. So, the way that people reported this historically, you have what we do, which is solids control, and then you have the mud company who controls the mud. So these are two separate companies in charge of basically one process, right?
You've got the mud engineer out there. Yeah.
Right. And so there's, it really depends on the relationship between everybody on the rig. You have some rigs where everybody's like on the same page, just like any other workplace. Sometimes they're not, which is difficult. And, but what we're trying to do is bring transparency to the process.
Yeah.
And the way to do that is rather than having a human report what's going on, we have our equipment reporting what's going on. And this is nothing really new. I mean, you have SCADA systems everywhere, right? And so what we've done is just basically plugged into PLCs, and we're transmitting that data where the operator's cloud is.
Yeah. And I guess maybe so each piece, I'm going to probably pull us back a bit. So can you talk about what a PLC is? Because I don't think we've hit on any of the kind of OT stuff in this yet. So
it's a project, process logic controller, right? And so it runs code from the various systems, and it tells a gearbox to engage, or tells in the case of our equipment, a bowl, the centrifuge bowl where the fluid goes through to spin, right? So it basically it's the computer for the equipment.
Right. It's the brain for the industrial.
But it also pulls the data out too, right? Or creates data.
It creates data. And there's serial, there's like Modbus. And again, I'm not like a control specialist, right? But after that, that's the stuff that I handle. I work with like control systems companies to get it.
To get it out
to my hardware. But that controls the equipment, and there's a lot of valuable data there. There's like run times, there's RPMs, vibrations. There's a lot of processes that the PLC monitors that we're able to transmit to the operators and also ourselves to know if there's an equipment failure, right? If the equipment's vibrating too much, right? Because if you have a very large piece of spinning metal, you want to have it balanced. It's very important to have it balanced.
Like your washing machine, old school washing machine.
Exactly.
Wobbling around and then put it on steroids.
Right, exactly.
And then also if you don't know the data coming out of it within a pretty short time frame, something really bad could happen downhole. Right? Like the criticality, it's funny because it's like the process itself of what you guys do isn't necessarily overly complicated.
No.
But you take that and you put it on a drill site with all the externalities that come with drilling, and the urgency and the cost and the risk from both safety and environmental perspectives. It's like a whole nother ballgame. And I think that's, again, one of the big things we hope to highlight for the tech community with this podcast is just like a lot of the stuff that we do in the oil field isn't necessarily new tech or new things. It's taking existing stuff and figuring out ways to oil field
That's
make
correct.
it work in these specific scenarios under these specific conditions with all these constraints and criteria that it has to meet in order to operate safely. And
it's not that we necessarily want to be slow to adopt things, but we almost have to be. Things have to be vetted before you can just implement them, where there's such high stakes, monetarily and just physical world.
And I definitely want to make the distinction. There's a difference between monitoring and control, right? We monitor, we don't control. We have people that are trained on the rig, all certifications, that are manipulating controls, right? But we do monitor. And when you start getting into control, I know you've had prior conversations about rig to cloud control automations, and it's like very difficult to do for a variety of reasons, right? And so we definitely don't control it, but we hope to do that at some point. And you and I have had conversations about that in the past. That's where I met you at.
HiveCell.
Okay.
No, I think that's honestly just a natural progression, right?
Sure.
Not just within the oil field, but it makes even more sense in the oil field just because of the additional risks and stuff associated with things. But, I think that's why when I first started talking to HiveCell and learning about the edge stuff, I got so excited about it, because it's very easy to see how the dots start connecting and leading to, hey, we were doing this on literal paper and Excel sheets, to we're monitoring everything in real time, to, okay, now we're monitoring and then reacting based off what we're reading from those monitors in real time without a human ever having to touch it, right?
Exactly.
It's going to take time. There's a lot of things that have to be hashed out. No one has any, big ML models that are 100% reliable or anything like that. But
it can be the vision, but you got to you got to work to it.
Yeah, I mean,
absolutely.
I feel like the industry as a whole understands it, at least, and it's not this crazy like exotic theoretical thing anymore, right? It's like, okay, we can see how these things compound with each other in these different techs, whether it's edge or just IoT in general.
Yeah.
And then you throw Starlink on top of it, and like you're solving all of the kind of pieces, and once you start putting all that together, you're like, oh, this could really be interesting.
I think what's interesting about that is you have existing systems out there. It's not like you're having to invent it from the ground up, right? Yeah. And so it's not. I think there's a tendency to want to overcomplicate things. That's where I was initially, right? But the more you go along the path of like trying to figure these things out, I really do feel like less is more in a way. Mm-hmm. We started with some very elaborate modems and stuff like that, tried to self-develop some stuff. It was too much. It wasn't that it was too much. It was kind of unnecessary. And so,
it's also, are you an infrastructure company, or are you a software company, or are you, Aerion? What is your core business?
Right. And so the best thing to do from our standpoint is align yourself, with a robust industry. Like if you're going to go with an IoT modem, right? Go with the most robust modem that you can find, right?
Yeah.
And then something that's you can expand on, right? Because once you install it in equipment, right, you don't want to reach capacity as soon as you install it. Yeah. And then from there, you can keep expanding the operations, but you want like as few components as possible. So like your edge device, running MQTT, right? Running probably Ignition Edge or something like that. And then you're pushing data out. Super simple.
Okay, so here we are. We're working up the stack. So we got the PLC, let's and now we're talking about your edge device.
Yeah.
Let's dive into that, and then maybe dive it, because again, we John and I are pretty familiar, but I don't think we've really gotten into this kind of edge stuff very much. Maybe with Halliburton, Federico a little bit, but like, I mean, let's talk about edge device. Talk about MQTT and like how that's different than some of the other protocols.
Yeah, I would even say back up a step further and basically start from the bottom, right? So the sensors to the PLC, and like, because that's another direct camera moment for all the tech people in the world. One of the biggest complications on any oil field operation is that there are potentially dozens of different vendors on the same job, all monitoring or pulling data from different things in different ways in different formats. And that's where things get really interesting from an operations perspective, because it's all disparate data and different people's systems at different rates at different times and all that. And so that's why, in my opinion, it's taking us so long to kind of adopt a lot of these things, even just as simple as monitoring, right? Not controlling or automating, just monitoring, is because there are all these different protocols, these different structures. Everyone is hesitant to have someone plug somebody else's stuff into their stuff, because what if it breaks, or if there's anything malicious, or they're going to steal their information, whatever. So it's really cool that you guys have have built what you've built so far, because of, I mean, that's a big hurdle out of the gate, right? It's like y'all aren't necessarily generating your own data if you don't have input from some of these other systems and stuff. So kind of walk us through from like the base layer. You've got your sensors up then to the PLC, then to the edge device, all the way up to the kind of the cloud side.
So like just generic architecture, right?
Yeah.
You have your sensors, and then that's being pushed to the PLC. PLC's running all these interactions with it, right? And so you have a set. You're not going to acquire everything from the PLC, because some of it is just it's not vital, right? So you define what you want to acquire from the PLC. That goes into your edge gateway, right?
And that's usually a Modbus connection between the PLC.
So it could be Modbus, serial. It really depends, and that's the other difficult part about oilfield equipment, is if you're doing this like after the equipment's built. In a lot of instances, you acquire equipment through whatever, and then you have all these different PLCs, right? So nothing's the same. Imagine like Windows 10, Windows 11, Windows 7, right? So you're having to sort of funnel all of this into your gateway, right? And then you have two paths. So you can push to the rig, or you can push to the cloud. We do both because we want to be independent, so that we can have control over it. And we provide our own connection. Trying to run off of the rig Wi-Fi, it's a lot of red tape. IT doesn't love it. So you have to.
It's another dependency, right? Like
it's another dependency
that you have no control over.
So initially, a funny story. Early on,
you can see both sides of it. I think
early on, we get the green light to connect to rig Wi-Fi, and then we had sort of a segregated hotspot by itself on its own network, and people are unplugging it to plug in their cell phones, like different people on the rig, right? So you're trying to roll out this project, and then it's getting unplugged. So it's like,
the hotspot was connected via USB or something, and they want to plug it.
Yeah, in like the doghouse or something, right? And so you're having a battle, stuff like that. So that was when we sort of made the determination that, okay, we have to be completely self-sufficient. We cannot rely on anybody else but our own comms. And so, you have your edge device that has a modem built into it, right? And so you can push your data to the EDR system, which is the drilling recorder. It's like the server on the rig.
And that's not going through the internet. Is that on it?
That's local now. Yeah. So that's locally on the rig. You're sending it, to the rig system. That's being done with whatever they want to do with it. Display it on the monitors on the rig, whatever.
And does that become part of the WITSML stream?
It does.
Okay.
Yeah. So it gets aggregated into the WITSML stream.
Okay.
Yeah.
So a few things there. EDR, for those who don't know, is basically a drilling rig's black box as compared to the airline industry. It's where all the data goes and ends up most of the time. It's something that the completion side has yet to figure out, and Bobby and I are intimately familiar with that in our past.
So that is a luxury of upstream
careers of drilling specifically. Drilling. Payson, I believe, was the first one that introduced that back in like the early 90s, and it took another 20 years for completions to be like, hey, that's a good idea. But at that point, it was too late because frac was blowing and going.
Yeah.
But so that's what the EDR is, and then what was the other one I was going to mention? The
WITSML probably.
WITSML, yes. I'll let either of you get into that because you're both more familiar with
WITSML is just basically a data standard for transmitting drilling data. And I actually have WITSML for completions now, but no one's really adopted it. And say what you want about it. It's XML based generally. I think they can technically push it JSON if you want it, but most people...
I'd rather in that, but...
Yeah. But I think it's pretty standard. It comes out in its XML format. But whether you like it or not, it is a standard and people know how to develop against it. And so it's allowed the Corvas of the world and different, vendors to actually develop against it because it's a standard and they can do things with it.
Look what we can do when we have data standards, guys. Let's figure it out on everything else.
So again, like I mean, what you guys send to it is just one piece of it, but there's all the different pieces, but it's a central place. That stream is where, people can get the data they need in real time.
Right. And that allows you want to have multiple streams, right? Or multiple avenues for data acquisition, because it's not guaranteed that they will let you plug into the EDR, right? Like it's going to be operator specific, right? And so you want a way to be able to plug into, say, something like Corva or something else, right? Like I imagine a future oil field where you have, like, who's going to build Zapier for the oil field, right? Like who's going to build? Such a great idea. Are you going to build it?
Maybe the three of us need to, because John's talked about it.
I've been like foaming at the mouth over this for like a few years, like just aggregate this layer that you could plug into and then send data to whatever platforms operators are using.
No, I think we're actually finally, when Bobby and I first started talking about that, it was a few years ago. And, I started looking, I was like, man, no one even has APIs that are,
disparate,
exposed or anything like that. No one wants to work together or partner on shit. Everyone's still super secretive about everything.
Yeah, it's the worst.
But over the last, I think honestly, COVID was really the big kind of turning point for some of this stuff. We've started seeing more and more like Cold Bore and Corva partnering up with stuff. And like, that's exactly what the industry needs is when we can all specialize on the thing that we do really well and let someone else do the thing that they do really well, but then we can share and integrate with each other. Yeah. The possibilities get so much greater. But yes, we can chat after about that. I mean, it makes so much sense because there are so many workflows in the oil field that are just disparate for no reason.
I mean, I imagine it like it would be, and I know not everybody is using cloud platforms. Like I understand people still have their own on-prem stuff.
Yeah.
That's fine. But, you sign up for a commercial software and then you go get your API key and then you start working with the API. Like that's what I hope that the oil field goes to.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And so that's sort of what we're planning for. Like whether that's 5, 10, whatever years down the road, that's where I think things are heading.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think the operators help too, right? Like being able to have operators in their contracts say, you must have an API or you must be willing to share data or even let people plug into your box. They're not trying to infect it with the virus or steal your code.
Not trying to hack it.
Trying to make it easier for everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think, working our way up the second thing, we've skipped a little bit of a step. So I do want to go back. So you're saying to the EDR, but then also you're saying also you can push to the cloud platform.
Right.
And then we can get into on that side because, John and I have talked about APIs and some APIs are not very good.
They aren't.
So it's a matter of like, we've said before, maybe I just want you to just dump a CSV in a FTP folder at this point because it'd be easier to get than getting out of your copy API. But,
right.
But let's step back until we get to that point. So the edge device can send locally like on the rig, but then you're pushing up to your cloud platform.
Yeah. And so sort of how that works is that is another component that's independent, right? We originally had a fully integrated solution. The company no longer provides it. That's another thing to look for is when you're getting hardware, make sure that the roadmap is set up long-term so that you don't get rugged on the the device, right? Because then you have to start ripping and replacing. So try to keep things modular, keep few components. And to your point about the MQTT, the beautiful thing about MQTT is you're not wasting a ton of bandwidth.
Yeah.
It's sending data whenever something changes rather than...
It's a push rather than having to pull it.
Exactly right. Yeah. And so you're not pinging, your data every second to check for something new. It's sort of like a webhook for any developers out there is how I view it. I know it's a little bit different, but...
I'm trying to think what the JavaScript, it's not, it's a socket essentially.
Right. Like a WebSocket.
Yeah. WebSocket.
Yeah.
That's what but I mean, there's a couple different protocols. I mean, I'd be interested to know what you guys, because I know like there's some where you can guarantee delivery.
Yeah.
And then another one where if you got super high frequency, you can send it but be like, it may or may not make it there.
Yeah. So we have like an MQTT platform basically. And, it's plugged into the edge device. And so you set the parameters, your dead bands, which is basically like, when do I want it to send a piece of data?
Yeah.
And then, so data's sort of like trickling up as it's changing. And so that keeps your bandwidth costs lower, which is very helpful, right?
What happens if you lose connection?
Well, yeah, try to get it back up as fast as possible. That's
No.
and
Well, I mean,
it
that was
can-
kind of a leading question. I mean,
From
just
the-
as far as
from the data
MQTT,
side.
the beautiful
Yeah.
thing about MQTT is if you don't have connection, what it stores it
it
until
stores it locally and then
until you
pushes
come
it up
back.
whenever it gets connection again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So again, like you could be sitting there polling, never get anything, but like because sometimes when you have those polling type systems, like they're polling it for a certain timestamp because
Right.
it knows what time it is, and then you lose or you have to go back and repoll everything. Like this, we'll just store it until all right, now AT&T is back up, and then that whole packet of data is gone.
That's right. Yeah. So you can, there's different data retention time frames, but you typically retain it on the device. And then whenever you have a live connection again, it'll push it back up. Yeah.
Bobby's speaking from from experience on the other side.
Yeah.
Of
Yeah.
it.
It's nerve wracking sitting there watching drop connections and you're like,
Yeah, but
Yeah.
we at RDS,
Especially if you
we were
don't
working
have MQTT.
Yeah.
you're working with like a polling type system, and it's just like then how to go back and get stuff off of the device. Or,
Yeah.
it's just
That's why I'm a big proponent of if you're not going to self-develop things, to get a very robust platform
Yeah.
for that. So a lot of that infrastructure is handled, so you don't have to have
Yeah.
a massive team to handle infrastructure.
Well, and it's tested by other people too, right? Like
Right,
the
supported.
risk, it's de-risked to a
so can you speak to that platform? And I don't know how much is proprietary or not.
Yeah, a lot of it's proprietary. I mean, it's pretty standard stuff, like Ignition Edge. Everyone knows Ignition Edge who's in the automation controls, and
Sure.
there's a lot of power in that. The real sauce is like the algorithms behind it that you can develop on.
So are y'all running? So this is inductive automation.
Yeah, right.
Ignition
Mhm.
Edge version. Are y'all running Edge on that on your Edge servers?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and the beauty of that is it's low code.
Yeah.
And that's really cool because it's very supported. You can basically copy and paste projects very quickly.
Well,
And go ahead.
Ignition is also just like a big industry standard, right? Like
Right.
everyone in
Uses
industrial
Ignition.
automation
Yeah.
knows Ignition, uses it.
Yeah,
Right. So there's no
that are seeing
propriety to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's something that until I got kind of into the production data monitoring space, I had no idea that existed. And then once I got into it, I was like, holy shit, everyone pretty much uses Ignition.
Everyone.
In
I mean,
some form or
breweries,
fashion.
like nuclear power plants,
Yeah.
like everyone uses Ignition, and it's super cool, and it just keeps getting better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and they've got all the, I don't know what they call what acronym they use for their partners and all of that stuff. That's the other big thing on the industrial automation side, right? Is like historically there are all these like proprietary formats and stuff that each sensor vendor built so that they could basically lock people into their platforms. And now that has finally started going away, especially with people like Ansys and Ignition and those types of folks being able to basically make it. It's almost like a Zapier if you think about it, because it can read all the different formats and from different protocols and stuff like that. So does that then push to the Ignition cloud?
Not Ignition
Or-
Cloud.
okay.
We have a different MQTT service. And so it pushes to there, and then they have a very robust GraphQL API.
Okay, nice.
So rather than, like REST or anything like that, you're able to get what you need in the queries that you build from that API.
Yeah. Well, this is good. I mean, we haven't talked about GraphQL APIs
At all. I'm very interested because
It's
one of
really sweet.
Yeah,
one of
they're
my-
pretty cool. It's just you have to rewire your brain a little bit on it. But I mean, you tell me if I'm wrong. My understanding, I've used it very little because most people don't expose them, especially in the oil field.
Mhm.
They have no idea what GraphQL.
But it's like because like traditionally with a REST, you have like certain endpoints that you
Right.
can hit, and then like say you have to hit 3 endpoints to get the data you need, and then you have to combine them downstream.
Yep.
With GraphQL, you can almost kind of write that query against those 3 tables or endpoints, and get the data from one GraphQL call.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Nice.
and that's the beauty of it is like to your point, rather than having a library of endpoints, you have one endpoint, like one pool of data, and you're able to just fetch what you need out of it with the different, parameters basically.
You're
in the query.
structuring it
Yeah.
in the query and doing all the joins and stuff.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's
And so
cool.
when you fish stuff back out, like if you automate it from another system, like something like Data Factory from Microsoft or Logic Apps, like you're pulling it from that API into another platform, you're able to like dynamically change the parameters,
Right.
which makes it really nice because you could build a UI on top of that,
Sure.
and you don't have to like do 100 endpoints.
Yeah.
That's slick. And then So that goes into a database of some sort?
Yeah. So basically it just goes into the MQTT cloud, which on the back end of it, it's like a SQL database. And then that's where the API we plug into there.
Right.
And then we can push it to whatever other platform we want to, right? Consume it how we want, which is really nice. And that's sort of my first thing to look for when onboarding any sort of new technology. Like they have to have an API. That was my first requisite. And then I learned very quickly, to your point, you got to have a robust API that makes sense, because an API is nothing if it's not robust and well done.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No,
I had one and I wasted probably 3 days of developer time. And then it turned out I couldn't get the data in the back end that matched what I saw on the front end.
So frustrating.
And I was like,
and you immediately think
I
it's
see
your
this data
fault.
point right here. And they're like, oh yeah, sorry. Well, if that vendor's offboarded from our platform, I'm like, you can see it. You can't get it from the API anymore. I'm like
no.
Then how are you serving it to the
front
UI?
end?
Because I want that.
Like that's our API.
Yeah.
And you're like, no, that's literally
well, I was like,
that's what I'm paying for.
Yeah. Well, what I build is totally useless now because we need data all the way back to the beginning of the year. You know,
Mm-hmm.
like,
yeah. And so I think it's asking a lot of questions is the main thing. And when you find the people who are willing, the oil field's 24 hours a day.
Yeah.
So when you're working with these vendors, like, of course, don't be a jerk,
Yeah.
but you need them to answer the phone, and you need to have someone who knows the system that you've been sold.
Yeah.
And so that's another thing I've tried to align myself with. Just like when you're in the oil field, for the people that don't know, like you build these relationships with people and they answer the phone, right? Doesn't matter really when, but they're going to answer the phone. And so I try to look for those same partnerships with vendors, whether it's a sensor or whether it's cloud tech, like answer the phone. Microsoft, it's not the same thing, but their stuff always works.
Yeah.
So it's different.
Yeah, those
right?
are pretty robust. You can generally count on it. Like,
but the independent components, you want people that like know these things intimately. You want them to.
But even like, and you could argue, I mean, like Microsoft, whether you like their documentation or not, there is generally documentation for what you want too. So you better, it can be a and or kind of thing, but you better have either someone who pick up the phone or somewhere I can go and get the answer I need and be able to search it pretty quickly. But I think that's something people undershoot. And John and I love our open source stuff. But like, it's open source. It's on you. Like, if you decide to implement it now, you can obviously do like the cloud hosted version, and then you have that support. But I think to your point, like when something's business critical, you better have some support on the other end of it. I think that's why Oilfield IT loves Microsoft, because like there's just that support system around it.
Yeah, and I've heard a lot of conversations on this podcast that have gone back to Microsoft, but I really think it is true. Like most businesses run on Microsoft, right? Like as far as like Office 365. So once you're there, you're like not going to leave probably. There's really nothing to replace it in its totality of what it offers, right?
Yeah. Especially when they're coming in and offering all the operators infinite cloud credits to make sure they don't move to AWS or Google.
And like I sort of went down the AWS route early on, but I was like, everybody's here, right? So if you're building like even internal apps with like power apps, like low code, right? Your user base is there. You're not having to like jump through a bunch. You just manage it all from there.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
Yeah. Even like, one of our new data engineers, Sean, he builds actually like PHP apps, but you deploy it through Azure Web Apps, and he easily ties into our authentication. And so all the duo authentication our IT set up is already just kind of there as a gateway into it, and people can access what they need from the cloud, but it's all federated and it's easy to get to. I mean,
I'm excited about their partnership with OpenAI. I really tying it to the oil field specifically. There's like a lot of tribal knowledge in the oil field.
Yep.
And I know like LLMs and all this stuff, it's buzzwords right now. But after heavily using ChatGPT, I can really see a lot of that tribal knowledge getting integrated into the workflows that we're doing, right? And that's one thing I hope to do is like sort of start working with getting context out of the data we're acquiring to the end customer from Microsoft's cloud and their partnership with OpenAI and Copilot and whatnot.
I mean, just the idea of a Copilot. I mean, obviously it started off like on the kind of the coder GitHub side, but I mean, now they have just decided, do you have Copilot for Word or Excel, or I mean, even just across the whole Microsoft Fabric stack? I don't know how much you've looked at that.
It's sweet.
I mean, that's going to be where you can use Copilot to build your data factory pipelines and then your Power BI. I mean, just the whole, cradle to grave. I mean, the vision is great. And again, now let's see if Microsoft can execute on it, or how long it takes them to execute on it. It's usually an if, not when or a win, not if, kind of thing for them. They'll get there. But this is probably like the biggest data release they've had in a long time that I'm genuinely excited about. I mean, like it's been a lot of it's like,
piecemeal a little bit. Yeah.
But as they always do, they start to figure it out, and then they're like, oh, now we have this cohesive thing that works. Like Synapse was a disaster for a while, and it's gotten better and getting better, and now it seems like, well, shit, if this Fabric thing works out, this is going to be a game changer.
Yeah, they've done a really good. I mean, there's very few companies that can compete with the likes of Microsoft and Apple and those folks, but typically the bigger a company gets, the worse their
that's true
support, turnaround, innovation, and all that stuff gets. But Microsoft has done, they're one of the outlier cases as far as software companies goes, where just because they have so much built-in network effect from Office,
right,
and just Windows in general out of the gate, that they don't have to directly innovate. They can go buy someone, but the way that they innovate is by really truly being pretty good about seeing where things are going, quickly buying someone that's ahead of them in that space, and then figuring out ways to integrate it in every possible aspect across the stack and stuff. And I think that's their feedback loop that they've got, like Power BI, right? Like I remember when Power BI originally came out, I was like, I like the back end editor having a GUI instead of having to hard code stuff, which is really slick. But then it's like, but I can't, just little stuff that I was used to, like in Spotfire, it like was impossible to do at Power BI. And I was like, okay. And then you revisit it a year later and you're like, oh shit, this is like a much more complete product in a relatively short amount of time, considering it's a, international release of a software product. But I think that's one of their like big advantages, right? Is they have the network effect. Everyone is using their entire stack basically on a day-to-day in an office. And so it's just, how do we plug in these new things and make them as useful as possible? They've done a great job of really getting that feedback loop.
I think the same goes for Power Apps. I built a ton of stuff from Power Apps, and you always get asked in an IT role, hey, like, we have all these spreadsheets, they're all serving the same purpose. Like, how can we, from a C-level perspective, like, how can we see all this data, right? And so I've built a ton of Power Apps, and that platform has only gotten better.
Yeah,
right.
No, it's really. I mean, we got a couple just released too by our production tech. Built them and released them up. Went up and the field loves it. And
what I wish Microsoft would do is buy Bubble, because I develop like a field application for our guys on Bubble, and I think that if they acquired something that was outward facing, like a low code builder, on top of all the tools that they have, it would be a complete game changer. I'm really hoping for that. Yeah, because it's like, then you would be able to give your customers, easily
true
exactly.
Yeah.
Because that's the hardest part, is like, then you have to go build something custom for the customers.
Right.
But I'm a big believer of getting the data to whichever platform that they use, whether that's Corva, AI Driller, or any of these platforms.
Right.
Like, that's why I've gotten things to where it is now. So, because I'm waiting for the Zapier when you build it.
Yeah.
I'm like, we'll be first customer.
So going first, I don't want to skip this point because it's intimately important. I don't think the tech community understands this enough. So I'm hard turn to the camera. But what we were talking about earlier, as far as support, I think we understated it, to be completely honest. Like, as much as we were talking about it, you cannot work in the oil field if you aren't going to be able to have someone answer the phone when one of your customers calls you at 10 p.m. on a Saturday night. You might have 24-hour tech support where it gets pushed to a voicemail and then it goes into a ticket, and that doesn't work in the oil field, especially when you're doing operation at the operations level. So please be aware and cognizant of that, because it's very important. And just because you've got the best devs in the world, if they're not available, or they're
doesn't matter,
overseas on holiday and they're not available, you're going to lose customers very quickly, or not get them.
It really is amazing, like, how important just picking up the phone is. And it's not even just oil. Like, I mean, you see it, like, all these small business people on Twitter talking about, like, if you just move into an arena where the other guy doesn't pick up the phone and you just answer the damn phone, like, you could make a killing.
Absolutely.
I mean, there was something else I was going to go with there.
When I was in sales, like, I probably sold more by just answering the phone. Like, I mean, I think I was on Bourbon Street one time, and I'm talking to a company man. It was like during Mardi Gras, and like you're selling stuff then, right? Yep. But it applies to the technology aspect too, because once you get integrated, and they're starting to rely, like when you get a sticky product, and it's data related, and that dies, it's as good as your equipment being down. It's the same thing, right? And so it's part of the stack at that point. So it's like very imperative to answer the phone and fix the problem whenever there is a problem.
So, and especially, I mean, always, but even like early on, I mean, like I think it was Combo Curve. Like when they came out, like they'd be back with you in 10 minutes if you sent an email. Like, I mean, it's just like, and that was something you don't get that from Landmark and Aerion, like, you know, Halliburton. Like, I mean, like if you just get on the phone and then you're working through stuff with people, and if you put that first, like if you got a startup, you should put that first. Like, I mean, like it's easy to ignore, but if you don't have good documentation or people to answer the phone, like, you're screwed.
I want to know y'all's opinion on, is there going to be a startup that replaces like the Totcos and the like the EDR systems? Like, do y'all think there's going to be someone that comes in and revolutionizes that space, or that's sort of just baked in?
So my thoughts on this are interesting because it's more from the completions perspective, but I'm surprised, and this has actually kind of happened in the drilling space. I don't honestly know whether that happened through acquisition or what, but you know, the manufacturers have all of the opportunity in the world, right? The NOVs, the Dragons, everybody that's building equipment in the oil field has, like, you have 10 steps ahead of everyone else that's trying to go out there
and the money to do it, right? Yeah.
And you know exactly what the customer, like, you have everything you possibly need to know, except they're all huge. And so innovation is not normally the thing that they're the best at. But you know, you're the ones that's actually generating the raw data from your equipment. So therefore you should have the ability to then go do a bunch of stuff with that raw data.
Right.
But like I said, those companies typically are bigger and they are much slower to innovate. And a lot of times they overspend, they over engineer. And it takes look at Corva, right? Like people like that to come in and say, hey, this exists. We're going to piggyback off of that, but we're going to do a lot more on top of it than just what you guys are doing today. And so I think you'll see like consolidation really around.
I can't wait to see other companies. And there are some like AI drillers out there, right? I've spoken with them. But Corva's made it really easy to go in there, like their app store. Like they're making a hard, plug for what we're talking about. It's still a little cumbersome to integrate. I'm like, build a WYSIWYG, like I want to drag and drop dashboards and get stuff in there real quick. And I think that they'll probably get to that. And I hope there's more beyond AI driller and all that for all of the different peripheral services.
So without, I mean, I was just curious, like what does like 0 to 1 look like in that space? Is there going to be enough? Because I think to really replace it, it has to be that much better. People say, I'm going to move to it. Like, you can't just 1 to N on it and be like, oh, this is a little better. People aren't, I mean, you have to, for them to,
it can't be
get off of like WITSML or these standards that they have, like everything built off of. And like we were talking about before the show, like it has to make sense for you to even invest the time and money to transition to that.
It's got to be a step change, not a additive kind of situation.
Right. But I think, again, I'll go back to Corva. Like I know one of the problems we've run into is like we integrated, but the operators we work for, like it's, you work for operators you don't. And once you don't and they're on something else, then you have to figure out how to
get back in.
Get your data to their platform when they're not using XYZ company. You know what I mean? And so it's like Corva's done a really good job at building this platform. And I just hope that these other companies that are up and coming or the pump manufacturers and all these companies start building technology into their equipment. I don't know what the incentive is other than the operators are like, we need this, right? That's an incentive. I just don't know how, like a lot of these companies have so much market share that they kind of just, you got to take what you can get.
Well, I think the other problem of it too is it's a trickle up effect almost, where it's like, okay, we're NOV and we develop this new system that completely automates the drilling rig. Right? Like nobody has to touch it. in this future fantasy world.
Mm.
Well, so then NOV has to sell that to whichever service company is buying it. So NOV is going to want to make money off of it, and ideally in a SaaS ARR way. And then the service company is also going to want to make money off of it because it's the new thing. And then you have to take into account what the, oil and gas market is, right? Is it up? Is it down? Because
that's another good point, right?
The
cyclicality
value of what you're providing has to be so great that it's a legitimate step change in what things are doing. Otherwise, the operator just sees it as another cost potential, like another rabbit hole we can go down. But Oilfield typically treats data as an IT function and IT cost, not an additive benefit within each asset. And so that it's changing as
I think also, I think people are gonna, our generation, I guess, right? We'll split the difference between, us. They don't find it Oilfield that interesting, right?
Yeah.
And obviously, the environment that we're in is not conducive to people entering the oil field. I hope people see it as vital.
Yeah.
I at one time, when I started, and I didn't see a path for tech, I thought about getting out of it, and then I saw some things starting to change, and so I stayed in it, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's going to take more of that. I don't know if there's going to be a ton of new entrants because it's like not cool.
Yeah.
But hopefully that changes, right? Like we need it. Technology is going to be a pivotal part of it. I think we can make it like cleaner, better, all of those things. And oil tech's like really cool.
Well, yeah,
it's a really cool problem.
There's so many problems to solve. And so it's like, if you like solving problems, the oil field is a great place to be because there are so many. And it's not one of those where it's like, hey, we made, the manufacturing time of this thing 10 seconds shorter. So the company saves however many millions of dollars. It's, hey, we're a critical piece in the literal global supply chain of energy, which is not going anywhere anytime soon, regardless of the source. Like humanity has only ever needed more energy, and I don't see that changing.
Right.
The sources might diversify more and more, but energy as a whole is not going away. And there's a million crazy, interesting problems to solve. And there's all kinds of crazy, cool tech that no one really talks about, which is why DW exists.
Wasn't he like the Energy Viper guy on Twitter? He'll always show when people talk. He's like, we never actually replace an energy source. We may add more of another one, but we never like. He'll show the graph. I'm pretty sure like the graph is like we've never replaced an energy source ever.
Right.
It's just we've
supplemented.
Here it was, and now we found oil. Well, we figure out nuclear a little bit.
Right.
But it never like cuts into the other ones. Like it's just we need more. So
that's why we preach energy addition, not transition, because.
And using technology, I mean, let's make it cleaner, right? Like, I don't think anybody is against that, right? And I think that's the biggest misconception is like that everybody just wants to like walk around in oil-based mud in their living room. Like, just not.
I'm just stopping.
Nobody wants to do that.
Stopping by the park to dump out some oil into the pond. It's like most oil and gas people are hunters, environmentalists. They hike, they go camp, they ride mountain bikes. Like. We spend a lot of time outside, and it's yes, we want it just as clean as everybody else. I also want to be able to drive to work reliably every day and have electricity when I come home, and all of these joys that energy brings to the world.
No, it's just insane. I mean, you think about the whole infrastructure because everything it relies. I mean, like we were talking to my daughter about water treatment the other day, and it's just like the amount of energy it takes just to run a water treatment. Just that, and we just turn the faucet and there's clean water, and like it's just that all stems. Energy has a huge part in all that.
All contingent upon dense energy.
Yeah. Yep. Well, and coming back, circling this back to tech. Guess what? All those AI models run on GPUs, and guess what? GPUs need a lot more energy than compute has needed historically ever in time. And so, even just on the technology side, the energy demand is going to continue to grow and grow,
especially if we electrify everything.
Yeah.
That's to me the biggest like misnomer. It's just it's frustrating to hear. It's like,
well, it just comes out of the wall, right?
Yeah,
sparks of magic. That's what we call them in college.
Yeah, the electrons are made with magic.
Okay, I think we've got about 5 more minutes to wrap things up. So we typically end the episodes with some the speed round, just quick pepper you with some questions. And
all right,
get some good info out of you. But
so I mean, you've talked a lot about that you like to have the support, but are there any open source, tools that you generally like or have had a lot of success with?
I haven't really used a lot of open source stuff.
Yeah.
Now, just because of the support, a lot of things I've done, I need support because we don't have a massive team. It's like me and another person basically, right? So it's like you got to get it up and going and keep it maintainable. And so I don't really have any good open source.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, if you want me to just piggyback, because I think it follows pretty well. Like, what's your favorite managed service then?
Well, managed service, again, I plugged Microsoft Cloud like I work there.
Yeah.
Azure's I think the best inclusive cloud. You've got a lot of tools. You can get up and going with stuff very quickly. You can connect everything. And it's a good place to learn. That's what I like. I want a product I can learn from. And so, yeah, definitely Microsoft's cloud.
Nice.
Yeah.
What about language? What do you normally, if you're doing any code or
some Python? A lot of my stuff is like just small scripts. I don't write any huge libraries. I could sling a lot of JSON.
Yeah.
I can map the hell out of some JSON.
That's the gateway drug to
that is
data science is API calls. That's exactly how.
So APIs, right?
Yeah.
Like that's what I've focused a ton of time on. I actually find that I'm a terrible front end designer. I've designed a lot of front end. It's not good.
No,
but it's functional.
Design is difficult, and you had like the advertising background, and where you even done some of that,
right? And so mine might look better than other people's bad designs.
Yeah,
but it's not great. I really love backend. I love APIs. I'm just an API aficionado. Yeah. I will go look for like the ISS, International Space Station, has an API that you can, I can just go find all these obscure APIs.
Yeah, I do the same thing.
Yeah,
it's fun.
I know. I see your LinkedIn post. I'm like,
it's fun. Well, it's just like, hey, I can type a few things, and I've got all this data available to me to do whatever I want with.
Exactly.
And it's when it works properly and it's well documented and there's no issues, APIs are awesome.
You know, it's an amazing company. Like, real quick, and I think you'd like it. You should probably talk to the guy Ethan who runs it. There's this company, Portable.io, and they're like, we've talked about Fivetran before. They're like Fivetran, but they'll write it for any obscure API. Dude, I talked to him for 30 minutes, and it was just like, here's 2 APIs. Like, it's not a big deal, but I swear when I got off the call with him, he's like, here's a prototype. Like, I don't know what system he has behind it.
Yeah.
But he can connect like any API and have it into a Snowflake data warehouse. Like, it's freaking insane.
Yeah.
Like, he's got some system behind there. Like, he connected to it. Like, you just tell them, like, this is what I don't have. I want it. And then they'll build it, and it's $200 a month or whatever. Like,
yeah.
Oh, that's cool. That's real cool.
Yeah. That's, I think that's where we're starting. I mean, you mentioned it, Fivetran. I've messed around with that a lot based off of Bobby's recommendation. And it's kind of like Zapier, but for APIs, right? You've got all these pre-built APIs. You just connect them, you authenticate with your credentials, and then you set it. It gives you a little GUI that says how frequently do you want this to pull the data, and then where do you want me to push it? Do you want me to push it to Snowflake or BigQuery, or where do you want it to go?
Definitely will.
It's
check it out for sure.
They're pretty slick. But yeah, it's one of those things. It's like, yes, as a developer, you could hire someone or do it yourself, but then, especially like this is my big issue that I run into with a lot of APIs, because on the marketing side, a lot of them are big public, social media stuff,
right?
And they're always updating them or changing the OAuth workflows, or they're always trying to get the latest security, which is great, but a huge pain in the ass if you're a solo developer, solo tech data person trying to do this with all of a bunch of different sources, right? Because it's like, okay, well, I've got to go back and rewrite, test it, and figure it out. Or I could just pay someone a few $100 a month to do all of that for me and just turn them on and off and manage.
That is very cool.
It's pretty slick. Do you have any favorite GitHub repos or Python?
GitHub repos, actually Nostr. So Nostr is a protocol. I don't know if y'all are familiar with it, but it's like a decentralized social network.
It's run on Lightning, right?
Well, Lightning's a part of it. Yeah. That's the payments part of it. But Nostr, you basically have different clients. The one for iOS that I use is Damus, and you can like import. So say you got kicked off of Damus, you could go to Blue Sky or another client, import your key, like it's a key that you have, and it'll, like, you could be anywhere on any platform. So there's no central governing body of it. And there's a ton of development going on. Lightning, which is, layer 2 of Bitcoin, is integrated with it. And so you could like pay people in Bitcoin for content. I think it's amazing. And that's the repo I've been following. I've been trying to figure it out. I'm learning WebSockets to try to develop something on it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, no, Noster's really, really fascinating because it's a you described it perfectly, decentralized social network. But the whole idea there is that you can't get banned because it's all your information. It's your private.
You can get banned from the client,
right?
But you can't get banned
move
from
over to another client
platform,
and all your stuff is still there. And then that leads into the Web3 stuff of you own your data, and if people want your data, they can pay you for it.
Shout out to Brave browser, amazing
Brave.
browser. Yeah, it's a decentralized browser.
That,
Very cool.
Favorite or influential book?
Okay, this is probably going to either make some people mad, but Elon Musk's new biography by Walter Isaacson. So Walter Isaacson has chronicled like Benjamin Franklin, Steve Jobs, like notable historic figures. And regardless of your opinions of Elon Musk, he's a prolific individual, whether you hate him or love him. The book's really well done. It shows you like how crazy he is from like personal relationship standpoint. But what it takes to like get some monumental stuff done. And so on a microcosm, it's like made me look at what I'm doing and sort of like put it under the light of scrutiny in a healthy way, of course. But that's been, I try to get like 2 books in on Audible a month. Yeah. And so that's been my first
check
one.
that out.
Go download it.
Because when I did Read 0 to 1, like it was Peter Thiel, but it
Peter
gave
Thiel,
you, but it gave you like insight into that PayPal mafia mindset.
Oh, it's
of, like,
incredible. Yeah.
Again, you need to go 0 to 1. You need to like do something big and earth shattering. But like it explains why. Like for a while, I was like, man, Elon Musk's like what would happen if you gave a billionaire or a five-year-old $1 billion? Like, I want to go to the moon and I want to build huge.
But he's doing it.
But he's doing it. But then like you just understand like it could totally flop. But like he wants to do something that literally no one's done. Like.
But his new book doesn't just pump his stock. Like it definitely shows the human side, which is helpful because I think that our generation has seen like the Facebooks and all these companies and like all this mythology. Yeah. And it made everybody feel like, well, why didn't I create the Facebook or something like that? And then you start seeing behind the scenes is helpful.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's the wrap up.
Yeah, just I was gonna ask like, who's your favorite social media follow?
Probably Sir Sleepy or Tannel on Noster for memes. They got some really banging memes. And
we're all about the memes here at DW. Don't worry.
Go no further. And then Zero Hedge, probably for like they're on Noster as well. Twitter, So Zero Hedge is probably
they was some really good stuff.
Yeah. I like. As much as we shit on social media for all the terrible things that it does to society, having people like that on there, that just put out really good, interesting stuff is such a good benefit. But man, appreciate you coming. Where can people find you?
LinkedIn.
Yeah.
And then I'm on Noster as Roboshi.
Okay.
So it's like robot and Satoshi.
Okay, there you
like that.
Yeah, Roboshi.
What about Aerion?
So Aerion.com. If also I'm looking to hire somebody who knows the Microsoft stack. Doesn't have to have super big chops from the ground up coding, but like understand how to integrate APIs and
I got someone we need to talk afterwards.
Yeah.
Cool.
So that's where you can find me. Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff.